discipline. That's some discipline.
You're listening to Hart Beat Radio.
This is Bob Johnson, live from the studios of Hart Beat Radio, Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Got a really good show for you, great fans of Hart Beat Radio this afternoon. Arizona wrestling with one of the very noted wrestling historians from that part of the land. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our co-host, Mr. Matt Merz from Portland Wrestling. Matt, welcome back to Hart Beat Radio.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be on here, Bob. I really look forward to this each and every weekend. Nothing like getting up a little bit early, getting ready for some Hart Beat Radio and a history lesson. And today's history lesson I'm very excited about because Dale Pearce has written two wonderful books. One is Wrestling in Akron, all about Ohio. And then the other is the subject we're going to talk about here today predominantly, which is the history of Arizona wrestling. Both are available online if you have an interest in learning about the history of the business. I highly suggest both these books, and I'm excited to get them on here and get going.
Matt, again, great to have you back on the show. And Bruce Hart, the man himself from Calgary, Alberta, here. Great Bruce Hart. Welcome back to Hart Beat Radio.
I'm looking forward to becoming enlightened about the Arizona. I'm intrigued with all of that, because for whatever reason, especially Arizona, it doesn't seem to be that well documented. I know we had a lot of wrestlers up here in the past that had come up from, they always seem to say they were from California or they were from Texas or they're from Oregon. But we had a few guys that were up that actually said they were from Arizona or had worked that territory. It always seemed to be kind of taking a backseat to Texas or California or Oregon, so I'm interested to hear some perspectives from Dale about that.
Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest this afternoon. The gentleman was on our show last year. I met him at the Cauliflower Alley Club. He's written some excellent books on wrestling, a real true wrestling historian. I'd like to welcome for this great edition of Hart Beat Radio, Mr. Dale Pearce. Welcome to Hart Beat Radio.
Good morning. It's still morning out here. The irony is, since the last time I talked to you, we have shut down the Ohio House due to some health issues, and we are living up in Olympia, Washington now, of all things. But anyway, it's a big change here. When we moved, unfortunately, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, like two of the Hart brothers, but I've been talking the hell out of that, too. And one good thing, if I had my rathers, I would have rather skipped the whole process. But one good thing that has come with that, with me getting it, and dare I say a high-profile person like Bret Hart getting it, is it's caused awareness of the disease to a bunch of men who had never gotten tested for it. And it's common in men over 50. So without dwelling on that too much, because it's pretty much trumped, my suggestion is if you're over 50, get the blood test every year and check for it and get screened. That way you're not going to get blindsided by it. But with that said, I'm ready to go here.
I want to go all the way back to the turn of the 20th century. In 1905, you had guys like Sid Varney, Roy Racing, Walter Bullman, Ed Hoosen were all in there. Do you have any records, any information about those gentlemen of old who really kind of started trailblazing wrestling in Arizona?
I recognize the names, but Arizona in territorial days was always what was called a wildcard state, meaning it was like neutral ground, kind of like Switzerland. You had an established promoter there, but he was like an island unto himself. And other offices could come in, like you'd catch guys coming from California to Texas and beyond, and from different promotions, and they wouldn't catch any heat from the central offices if they worked Arizona. I mean, you might have a card, for example, with an NWA guy and then somebody from the AWA on the same card, and there wouldn't be any friction, where in other places that just would not have happened. The names you mentioned, in the early 1900s to the early 1920s, there were a number of different promoters running in various venues, but the the time wrestling really caught on in Phoenix was in 1929 when they opened what they called the new Phoenix Madison Square Garden at 7th Avenue in Van Buren. It was a pink adobe arena, 2,000 seats, and the great Jim Londos took over as the promoter and the booker, and he nearly bought the building, but he later opted to buy a farm out in California, which he ran until the time he died. The first card at the Garden wasn't a wrestling match, it was a boxing show. And suspiciously enough, over 50 cars had their tires vandalized and sliced while they were in the parking lot, reportedly by one of these rival promoters who did not like the idea of this competition with the new arena. There's an urban legend, and you won't find it documented, that the next show, which was a combination wrestling-boxing show, Jim Londos got some of his Masonic brothers from the nearby temple downtown to patrol the parking lot with baseball bats and crowbars. Halfway through the show, 2 cars slowed down and made it like they were going to move into the parking lot, saw what was waiting them, and just went zoom and disappeared. And from that time on, the different factions decided that they were going to play nice and get along as promoters. So, for years I've tried to find proof of that story, but, the people who would have been involved have long been dead. At the Masonic Lodge, I'm a member, but that's not kind of something you would put in the minutes of the lodge. But from 1929 until 1979, the Garden was like the Mecca for wrestling in Arizona. Later, the Tucson Garden, which burned down, was like the second main venue. And in Yuma, they had a building called Joe Hunt's Sports Arena until the roof caved in, and fortunately there was nobody in there at the time, and then that building was torn down. But these names you mentioned here, I know who they are, but they're like little blips in history.
Well, let me throw out some names from that Londos era for you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about some guys like Sailor Jack Lewis, Grappling Green, Lloyd Ireland, Shorty Henderson. Jeannie Wolf, I know, was a famous girl wrestler down in Arizona there back in the 1920s and early 30s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was those guys were all. Usually, what they do is the main thing is you build these guys up to get a match with Londos. In the first match, see if this sounds familiar, Londos would lose. And
was Londos
everybody
the world champion at that time, or was he?
I believe if he didn't have the world title, he had some form of a belt they put on him. And what he would do was he'd lose a non-title match, and people think, damn, this guy's in danger here. Because keep in mind, people weren't smart back then. And the next match, the arena would be full, and Londos would go over and win.
I'm not sure if they're smart today either.
Oh, God.
Anyway, I won't digress. I don't want to go
Let me
from
ask
the
you, Dale,
sublime to the
about
ridiculous.
what about John Contos? I know he was promoting down there. Was that with Londos?
Yes, and Londos stuck around until I want to say around 1950. Contos was the key promoter in that era through World War II in the 50s. In the 60s, a fellow named Ernie Mohammed took over, and Mohammed ran until 1971, and then he had other businesses to do. His wife ran a big steakhouse. He ran a paving company. Now, if you look at the sidewalks by Arizona State University, to this day you'll see the logo Ernie Mohammed Paving Company, 1961, and that was by the same fella.
I remember another old fart that some of the Arizona wrestlers named Pavel Katonen.
Oh God, I knew that wild man.
Those were always the two guys that my dad would always get, these guys from Arizona, and they were all either Ernie Mohammed's boys or their Pavos. And from what I gathered, they were not compatible. They were opposition, or they didn't work with each other. But I just used to hear those names when I was a kid.
Pavel wrestled in, I want to say, the 1940s there where Wild Red Barry was around. Wild Red Barry got it on site in the car wreck. McGurk. He even, I believe, brought people all the way. Pavel sent people all over the place, both boxers and wrestlers. Now, in around 1985, he tried running a couple shows in Phoenix that we were on, but his idea, he was still living in the 1940s, and his idea of wrestling just wasn't what the people wanted, and it didn't fly too well for him. And he looked to be really old. He died I want to say about 10 years ago. But he was a colorful old guy. He really was. I would have felt sorry for some mugger seeing him walking down the street mumbling to himself and try to mug him, and then he'd probably stretch the hell out of him and then just go right on his way, keep right on muttering to himself like nothing happened. I mean, he was a tough old guy.
Yeah, I remember my dad always seemed to have nice things to say about him. My dad, I seem to think both Ernie and Pablo were not bad guys. I don't know whether they were perceived to be state-of-the-art promoters or not, but my dad always seemed to speak fondly of both of them, But,
well, I would have loved to have seen a shoot between your father and Pablo. That would have been interesting down there in that basement of yours. That would have been interesting.
Between the rock and the proverbial hard place or something.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Dale, let me ask you about when Jim Londos and John Contos got out in 1950. I know in December of 1950, Rod Fenton and Monty Magoo opened up shop down in Arizona. Can you tell me a little bit about those gentlemen?
They ran mainly they were from Tucson, and they were more along the lines of running in Tucson. One of the people that they introduced to wrestling was a big kind of bulky college football star with a buzz cut, and they were using him as security as they were breaking him in. And basically he saved Monty Ledoux in a riot, and that's when they started pushing him and training him a little more. That guy later became Gene Kaniski. I'm sure you heard of him. But
kind of a polarizing
Fenton and Ledoux were capable wrestlers, and Fenton went into promotion. Ledoux went into refereeing before he passed away. Both of them are now deceased.
And now, were they part of the NWA? Because what I've noticed online is it looks like in 1954 they joined up with the Alliance. Is that accurate?
I believe so, because Fenton also made a final run at running Tucson in the 1970s before he took sick and died. And he was working with the Amarillo office. And Kurt von Steiger took over promoting when Fenton got sick, and von Steiger ran a couple of years in Arizona himself. But yes, that would have been true. Fenton always had a good working relationships with Texas, and like I said, he'd bring in a lot of people from the Amarillo office. Funk Senior, Ricky Romero, Cyclone Negro, that crew.
I mean, he was bringing in Antonino Rocca, Buddy Rogers, Gorgeous George, all those guys, wasn't he?
Yeah. Gorgeous George had many matches in Arizona.
Was
that
Lord
before Carlton, or after Fred Blassie, a regional guy named Phil Melby.
Yeah, I remember Bill Melby.
Gorgeous George was a big draw. Rogers was there in the late 1940s when he was. They billed him as the North American champion. This was when you could again still get by with it. Say, he won the title in Madrid or somewhere. He had his feud with Rocca down there. He had some matches with a guy named Dick Hutton, who was a two-time NWA World Champion. Rogers stuck around some more back in the 50s for a couple different promoters. He came in now and again. But then when he got the world title, he was on the road all over the country. So anyway, there were a lot of people who worked in Arizona you wouldn't commonly think of as Arizona people. Don Kent, Len Rossi from Tennessee, Dick Dunn from down south, Woody Farmer, Chris Colt, Often Sika. Sika Naya had his first match in Phoenix.
Did Baron Michelle Leone get through there, Dale?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, him and the other Leone, Ripper Leone, were both there quite a bit. But then, they were out of California, so Phoenix was, an 8-hour drive, so it was an easy trip for them. They had a lot of people from California.
And then is it accurate in 1957 that a couple gentlemen named Carl Sarpoulos and D.W. Bartlett took over for Fenton for about 6 months? What happened there?
That's one, honestly, I don't know.
Before
Fenton could have, hired out some help or something, because Fenton was starting to book all over the place too. frankly, he was extending himself more than he probably should have. I believe he was even running. He bought all the way up into Canada, even with Kaniski.
Oh, I know Fenton was running Vancouver with Gene in the '60s, and they actually entered into some deal to run up here, and it was, excuse the expression, a fucking abortion with what Rod was doing up here. They damn near killed the territory, but I never had any great memories of him. As a result of that, I think I heard he was originally from Edmonton, old Rod. I remember he had a big cigar and was always disregarding everyone else's advice. I remember he was always trying to tell my dad, this is the way it's got to be done. And he and Gene were kind of, single-handedly ran the whole thing into the ground, and then my dad kind of severed ties with them, and he later on became with Gene. He kind of patched up things, but he never had much use for Rod at all. He had nothing but kind of lousy things to say about him. But,
and you said something earlier there, Bruce, about Carl Sarpolis?
Yeah, Carl was the promoter in Amarillo prior to Dory Funk Sr. kind of taking over. I think he maybe took it over from Carl Sarpolis, but that was out of Amarillo. And I remember the Funks told me they ran once in a while, and I think they're more in New Mexico with Mike London, and I never knew that they ran in Arizona too much. It wasn't that far from where they were running, but that was the thing that always intrigued me about it. They had some big cities in Arizona, yet you never ever heard of it being like a really stable, vibrant territory. Like back in the 50s, 60s, you'd hear of guys coming out of there, and once in a while you'd hear them talking about having shows down there and the odd thing like that, but it was nothing like, say, Shire's territory in Frisco or, the L.A. office with, Eileen and Cal Eaton and Mike LaBelle or like Dallas. I've never, frankly, ever heard of Phoenix being a really dynamic, thriving wrestling metropolis or something, so I was always intrigued.
It was all right for the people that lived there, I guess. But what they would do, a lot of people, I think, would come in to get away from the winters back east and that. The climate's good, and they'd work like a 6-month stint, a 3-month stint, and then they'd be gone.
All the snowbirds.
Yeah.
We're talking about some of the guys who were wrestling in Ohio, and I think this gentleman, I have a caller calling in here from area code 401. That looks like Rhode Island. I think I know who it is. If I'm not mistaken, this is the great Fred Curry.
The names you were hitting out was very familiar. You talked about Roy Shires. Something. I wrestled Arizona when I went there with Big Time Wrestling. We were in Scottsdale.
On the first card, they did at the Arizona Coliseum. It was a tag team match, you and Terry Funk versus Von Hess and Bun Shots. I don't know if you remember that one or not. It would have been about 73 or so.
That's correct, because, that Big Time Wrestling was going all over the country. I mean, we went to Alaska, we went all through Wisconsin, we even went to New York, Binghamton. But we went down to Arizona. On that little tour, we went to New Mexico, Albuquerque. We went to Arizona, and it just was very expensive and very tedious. I mean, all we were getting was the TV hype. Why, you from Arizona?
Right. I was born in Akron, Ohio, but my father was a designer for Goodyear Aerospace, so we was sent around the country, and then he finally settled in Glendale, which is a suburb of Phoenix, and worked for the Goodyear branch at Litchfield Park until he died. So technically I'm from Ohio, but I grew up in Arizona. But we would still always, when we would come back to Ohio every summer, see relatives, see wrestle at the Armory, go to the War Memorial Auditorium, which is now, they call it the Civic Arena. So I saw the best of both worlds. And the thing is, this was way before the time of cable TV. So to see the different promotions, you actually had to go to that state. That's the concept people today, the younger guys, just couldn't fathom, because you turn on the TV and you got wrestling from God knows how many places where it wasn't the case. You saw wrestling in the area where you lived, and you read about it in the magazines. and that was about it. A whole different ballgame.
Back then the territories were prevalent.
Mm-hmm. Guys today, I started managing in 1979, and the thing is, these guys today, there's some all right guys, but a lot of them, they just won't listen to you, and they don't get it. Okay, in your day, a drop kick was the finish. Kaboom! Everybody waited for that drop kick, maybe 1, 2, 3, and a pin. Boom! That was it. Now it's a high spot. Like guys get up and say, "Thank you, may I have another?" And what they do today is too hard on the eyes, too much for the people to absorb, I think. And you try and tell these guys, look, slow it down a little. Space your moves out. Why don't you try this? And it's like, oh, that won't work. That won't work. And I'm like, man, how do you know it won't work if you're not even willing to give it a chance? Give it a try. And they won't even do that. I mean, so it's okay. You go out there, you crash and burn. Carry on. Mm-hmm.
He says, get over in the business, you got to be an original.
Right.
The Sheik had the camel clutch. Fritz Von Erich had the iron claw. I had drop kicks. This guy had that, boom, boom. But you got to be an original. You can't be repetitive. The guy does this, they see that every week. Nowadays, everything is centered around the television. Like Lou says to me, hey, we're not in wrestling business, we're in television business. Everything is settled around the TV and the props and the time. And, I hardly watch wrestling now.
If you grew up in this era and you think it's great, that's fine too. But it's from my ear, it's a matter of what you're used to, and it's like, good God, this is awful.
Well,
but the old days, I don't think are going to come back. I don't know. Mm-hmm.
But
I remember you from. In fact, there's some in my Wrestling in Akron book. There's some photos of you and Killer Brooks when Walter Moore was running there. You and Killer Brooks. There was a program for you.
Walter Moore was the promoter in Akron.
Mm-hmm.
He was a funny guy.
Oh yeah, he had. For people who don't know him, he was a short, stocky guy. He often wore a cowboy hat, and he always had a cane because he was elderly. But what happened was he won.
I think he won the lottery, didn't he?
Yes.
He said he did.
He won $300,000 in the lottery, and that's when he decided to say, "Oh, I've done this since the 1940s. It's time for me to pack up and go to Florida." And that's what he did.
Walter Moore. I'll just tell you a quick story. Then, Walter Moore was a real funny guy. He used to run like little mini auctions in his show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
that's right.
Of any value, his son would always win.
Well, my father won a big old box of potato chips there one time.
Well, I mean, you were lucky because I remember I think they had a goat or a horse or a motorbike, something, and his son won. And people started booing, and he got you don't want my kid to be get this and it just he used to crack me up, that guy.
Oh God, yeah. He was always an alright guy because I was just a teenager, taking pictures, just some mark to him. But he'd always he'd tell guys sign the autograph book for the kid. He's got signatures from all over. In Arizona, there was a guy named Tom Ramirez. He never wrestled outside of Arizona and Juarez across and he was telling me the way he got in, he just happened, he was a teenager, he just walked into the building and sat down, and there's like Gory Guerrero and Blue Damon and whoever and all these guys working out in the ring. They stop and look at him like, who the hell are you? What are you doing here? He says, I'm just watching. I tell him, no. You do one of two things. You either get in the ring with us or you take your ass out the door. So he was dumb enough to get in the ring with them, and they kicked his ass. The next week he's back and said, I want to learn some more of this. So they kicked his ass like 2 or 3 times, and they said, and afterwards they said, hey, you want to learn this stuff? Okay, here's what we really do. But if you tell anybody about it, remember what happened those first 1 or 2 times? Just multiply that by 10. What goes on here stays within these walls. You don't. It was like being with the mafia. You don't talk about this to anybody.
Back in the early 60s, I know Ernie Muhammad and Al Fenn started the World Athletic Association down there in Arizona.
Right.
With wrestlers like Jody Arnold and Chuck Carbo, Tito Montez, Don Kent, Ron Dupree, Chris Colt, Black Boardman came through there. Tell me about that, Dale.
Well, a lot of them, I started in 79 after Muhammad had done, he'd gone as a promoter, and right after the Phoenix Madison Square Garden closed. But a lot of those people that you mentioned, I was able to work with. Other promoters took over in other venues. Jody Arnold was a very, very good friend of mine. What happened before him for many, many years was a guy named Don Arnold from out of California wrestled there. Big major heel. And what they did was they brought in Jody as under his real name as Joe Job for like 3 or 4 matches as a baby. Then all of a sudden he turned on some guy and started stomping the hell out of him, and then he announced, "I'm really Jody Arnold. I'm Don's nephew. I've been playing you all along, blah, blah, blah." Instant heat, just instant program right there. Jody could have gone anywhere in the USA had he really wanted to, but he was a Mormon with, he eventually had 10 kids and a thriving solar energy business in the day. So he just said, I'm happy working Tucson, Casa Grande, and Phoenix. But every major star that came in for the indie offices ended up working with him, and they gave him a win. You didn't hear about it too often, but Billy Graham put Jody over by a pin in Phoenix. He did some shots for us right before he wanted to tune himself up, right before going to the Fed to do his program with Backlund. And he did 3 or 4 matches, and he actually put Jody over. Jody was probably one of the best-kept secrets in the wrestling business that ever happened. Chris Colt and Ron Dupree, they were the Hells Angels in the Ohio, Michigan area. They claimed to be brothers, but they were actually kind of like a husband and wife, if you kind of get my drift here.
Well, I'll tell you what, Crisco was a hell of a worker.
Oh yeah.
Crisco was one hell of a worker. Another guy you mentioned, Don Kent, there was another great worker.
Kent and a guy named Tito Montez filled the Phoenix Madison Square Garden for 9 weeks straight. And then Ernie Muhammad said, okay, Tito's going to go over in a cage match. And Tito said, well, you better have something hot on the undercard because you're going to be sending the people home happy instead of mad, and your house is going to be down. And Muhammad evidently didn't follow through with anything big on the undercard. And sure enough, the next week the house was down. But Don Kent would come into Arizona during the winter times to get away from the winters out in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and that area. He was a big draw there. Costello never came in with him, who was his main tag team partner.
What year was all this taking place?
That would have been a couple of years in the 60s. From I want to say like 63 to maybe like 69. He was never there full. Colt started there. Him and his wife started there in the 60s as the Hells Angels, and then they got suspended legitimately by the athletic commission because these geniuses decided we're going to get a bunch of heat by burning an American flag on TV when it was still legal to do so. They did do that. It got them a lot of heat, but it also got them kicked off of Channel 5 TV, where they had to go to Channel 21, which is a UHF station. In around 71, I want to say, they would have headed back to Ohio, Michigan for a while. Then they came back to Arizona, went to Washington, where Ron Dupree died in the ring from a heart attack. Colt, after that, came completely unglued, and he eventually contacted AIDS and passed away. The most bizarre individual you could ever hope to imagine, but he was a mad genius. He was 20 years ahead of his time with the spots and the music and the makeup and but if only he could have conquered his personal demons. Pills.
I could work against that guy 24/7. I can work against him in a 2-hour match. I loved working with that guy. I mean, he took bumps that were phenomenal, and he had good time, and Don Kent too. I'm surprised about you're talking about Arizona. I was around these guys all the time. They never mentioned Arizona. I thought I thought Don Kent never left Michigan, and Colt. I know he was in
here's Ben
Boston.
Ben Justice. There's another one. Colt Dupree. They brought him into Arizona for a program. Ben Justice. There's another
Ben
name
Justice.
for you.
There's another Michigan boy.
Did you ever know Fred? That old he used to book the girl wrestlers all the time. A guy named Billy Wolf.
Yeah, that was Mildred Burke's husband for a while, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was before the Moolah and.
Yeah, I remember my dad always had to book the girls through Billy Wolf, and I think even Old Tune Byers.
That was one of the originals.
I know women's wrestling was pretty big down in Arizona between 1956 and 1960 with women like Laura Martinez, Carmen Scorpion, Marie Vagnone. Were those girls coming through Billy Wolf back then?
Marie Vagnone was one of Mildred Burke's students, but I think
I remember
Mildred was out of it by then. Because Mildred ran her own school for a while in California and did her own booking thing, and I think Billy was either
Mildred
dead
had
or
like a bitter breakup with Billy Wolf. My dad was telling me Billy Wolf was kind of screwing around with a bunch of the other girls too, and then Mildred was kind of like the big. My dad told me Mildred was half tough. Apparently, kicked Billy Wolf's ass or something, and left him. And a few of the girls would come up here, and very few of them had anything good to say about Billy Wolf. I never knew that much about him.
Yeah, one of the old women in Arizona, Princess Tona Toma, worked for Billy
I remember
Wolf.
that name.
She didn't have too much good to say about. Well, she didn't have too much good to say about many people. She was an interesting case. Drunk all the time. Had a bunch of snakes in her home. I mean, pet snakes. I mean, going to her place, it was like going to the friggin' Addams Family. You know, you open the door and there's all these monsters running around and stuff. Yeah.
You gave me another name that I'm going to accuse that Tom Berger going out with. I'm going to say that was his old girlfriend.
Oh, God.
Every girl wrestler there was, I accused him of going out with. Heather Feather.
Oh, God.
All of them.
Oh, God. Does anybody know whatever happened to Heather Feather? Is she dead? I mean, with all that weight she was carrying.
No, she's not dead. I heard she was driving a bus in Michigan.
Sue Green, Paula Kay, Heather Feather.
Lou Klein trained Heather.
Right.
And Rita Cortez was the one that was having some kind of a fling with Buddy Lee. I remember the guy named Buddy Lee was always
and Moolah
booking.
Caught him.
And
Moolah caught him, and that's when the big war started.
Well, gentlemen, to get back to Arizona, let's talk about the time that Chris Colt dropped acid before he started that cage match.
Good.
I never heard about that one.
Right about the time that the ref rang the bell, Bruce, the spiders started to crawl up over the cage to come at Chris, and he hightailed it out the door, went in the back, and was out of the arena before the match even started.
Yeah, and he started picking off fans too. A riot started because the audience don't know what the hell is going on, and then the promoters' security guards went nuts. They panicked, and they started spraying mace all over the place. I mean, it was just a mess. It was the riot to end all riots.
Who was the promoter?
Let me think. That would have been either Von Steiger or a guy who came right afterwards named Paul Harvey. No relation to the radio guy. It would have been right around, I want to say 74, 75 or so.
Did they bring Colt back after that, or if I was
he was done for the night. The card was done for the night because like all hell broke loose. There was a massive fight within the audience, and basically they just said, "Okay, show's over for tonight."
I know if I was the promoter.
Colt either left or got fired right after that because that was like the final straw where they put up with this stuff for a long time because the guy was so good in the ring. I mean, you could have him on an opener, mid-card, or in a main event. And it was guaranteed that was going to be the best match of the night. But he just lost it.
Lanny Poffo, I believe, said that Chris Colt is the greatest wrestler that never made it to the WWF.
I'd agree with that.
I remember my dad had a guy in here in the 70s who he'd had some misfortune, Dr. Jerry Graham.
Oh God, yeah, I've managed him when he was on his last legs. They always said, if you ever hear, yeah, he was in Phoenix. In fact, he was the only Graham who really was a Graham, and that was his stepmother's name. He took the name.
Eddie and Luke. My dad started Luke Graham up here with him, kind of. And Billy Graham was also. He actually, ironically, hooked up with Dr. Jerry in Calgary. Jerry was kind of on his last legs up back then. He was helpless alcoholic and all the other, but nonetheless, he seemed to somehow still have some charisma or a bit of, he had a pretty good understanding on how to get heat, and unfortunately his demons, alcohol and whatever else, seemed to, kind of overtake the other, but yeah, he was another legendary Arizona guy that he had a pretty big footprint in the business. He had a pretty good run with Vince Sr. back in the 50s with Rocca, and
he might not have a Vince McMahon Jr. if it wasn't for Dr. Jerry. That was his idol growing up.
Yeah, he was.
Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah. We all.
Thanks a lot. We're forever indebted.
Yeah, but yeah, that's. I'm surprised we didn't allude to that name earlier in Arizona, because he was
the mainstay there. Yes.
Yeah.
Eddie Graham was there for a while too. Luke Graham, I don't think ever wrestled there, but then Billy got was from.
I think
Arizona.
He was from Tempe, I thought he was from Tempe or one of the.
Paradise Valley. It's kind of like a suburb, yeah.
I think Curt Hennig went to high school down there too, didn't he?
Yeah, briefly, yes, he did. He went to. Now he graduated up in Minnesota, but what happened? The father was down in Arizona for about a year, selling real estate, and he tried to run a couple of shows. And I remember Curt Hennig. He was, I believe, 2 years older than me. I went to Glendale High, and he went to Shadow Mountain. He was like a 191-pounder, so he wasn't the heavyweight. The heavyweight was the toughest guy on the team. His name was Bo Jenkins, and Jenkins never went pro. But Hennig spent some time in high school, and I remember meeting him in high school. For a while, I actually worked as a manager for him, and he was in Arizona in the 80s, working as a security guard in Tucson by day. A guy named Archie Goldie worked as Stomper. Wasn't he one of the Calgary guys? Big guy.
Yeah,
Buzz got ugly as sin, yeah.
I'd always hear more of places like Tucson and Tempe or other places. I never ever heard of Phoenix itself. I've never ever heard that being a really thriving hotbed for wrestling. I was wondering if that was the case, or if it wasn't, why Phoenix wasn't a real major wrestling center or whatever. I've never ever connotated Phoenix with being a real good wrestling
that would
place.
be the $1 million question. It was in my era when I grew up there, and then when I worked there. Okay, it was good for what it was. But for whatever reason, after Ernie Muhammad, promotions had a hard time getting television. And that was one of the problems with that hurt a lot of the promotions that came afterwards. No TV, you're halfway buried to begin with. The indie groups that came and went, they weren't crappy like the indies of today. You had some good guys. You had good programs. It was like watching minor league baseball opposed to major leagues, but it was good stuff. But the lack of TV is one of the things that really, really, really hurt.
How come they couldn't get TV? I never.
There were a lot of bad vibes that still carried over from when Chris Colt did his flag burning thing. And
who was the promoter for that shit, or who's the guy?
That would have been Ernie Muhammad. That would have been ill-conceived. I'm surprised there wasn't even more fallout. Because keep in mind, this was when burning a flag was still illegal. I mean.
Oh hell, that's treasonous stuff. Back in the,
Oh, it got heat, all right. It filled the damn building, but it also cost the TV.
Not well considered heat.
Right. That's the maximum of cheap heat. But still. I mean, God, I wonder their brains were out to lunch. I mean, really.
Oh yeah.
Well, let me ask you about the 1980s here a little bit, Dale. I know Bobby Jaggers came through there, Tony Hernandez, Johnny Ringer, Golden Eagle.
Tony. Oh God, yeah, those are all people I know or knew well. Tony Hernandez also had a run in a Frankenstein costume as a monster in Los Angeles for a bell, and evidently he got into a shoot with Andre of all things, and Andre eventually pinned him. But a lot of promoters were mad because Andre actually had to miss a couple bookings, too, because of injuries. They took each other to town. You see, Andre didn't realize that Tony Hernandez was a black belt. And he was also like 6'6". He was a good-sized guy of his own. But he was no match for Andre. But they got into it in the ring for whatever reason. And that's when Andre beat him, and the monster thing became persona non grata in Los Angeles, and he came back to Arizona. In fact, if you want to see what Tony looks like, there's an old movie from the 80s called Losing It with, I think, Tom Cruise and such. And Tony Hernandez plays the jail boss, a prisoner in the Tijuana jail. If you ever get the movie or can rent it, it's called Losing It. You can see what he looked like without the Frankenstein mask.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the indie promotions there. Like Barry Bernstein ran WSWA, Western States Wrestling Association.
Bernstein is dead, and not
promoting.
I can't really say anything good about him because I dislike the guy with an absolute passion. He did run for like 2 or 3 years and survived without TV, and he actually had a couple of guys come through that worked with him. That was where Graham and Jody worked together. But Bernstein's problem was he ran a big martial arts school, and he wanted the wrestlers to all bow to him and kiss his ass like the martial arts students would, and that didn't quite, jive. The wrestlers like, piss on you, sensei. We ain't gonna call you no goddamn sensei. But he lasted for he ran weekly shows there at a smaller arena, and he actually survived. He had Graham work for him for a while. Jody was there every week. I was there for a while, but eventually Eddie Sullivan, Ken Lucas, but eventually everybody quit on him. They got tired of his crap and walked out, leaving him with himself, his wife, and his son on the card, and running ads in the paper, wanted pro wrestlers, no men, women, midgets, no experience necessary, we will train. And that was the beginning of the end, I think, for wrestling in Arizona. Different promoters came behind.
What about Steve Ketcher with the AWF back in '85?
Gator Wolf ran mainly. That would be Gator Wolf. He ran mainly on the Indian reservations up north rather than the fixed. Because while I don't know whether he was a real Indian or pretending, but he ran on the Indian reservations up in the north, and you would always draw up there because this was before the time of the casinos, and there was nothing to do. And so they'd pack whatever arenas they went to. He had Billy Anderson, Louis Spicoli. I never worked on those cards because I never fully trusted them, and I'm glad I didn't because evidently a lot of people are still waiting to get paid from him to this day. And good luck with that because he is now doing a very long jail sentence. So.
What about the Navajo Warrior? I know he is a big star down there, or was for a good decade.
Yeah, he came on right about the time I was leaving Arizona, but he was probably one of the best there. He ran shows. He was used on the undercard in the Fed for a while. He's working with them, with the Fed now, and doing some kind of stuff with, not wrestling for him, but some kind of thing like, designing their video games and that. So he's making a good living there. He was a very, very good wrestler, good-sized guy. He looked like a wrestler for once. Build, the muscles, the charisma. Navajo was a good guy, and he trained a lot of guys. That guy that he worked as Horseshoe for a brief time in the WCW. He was something else in the Fed. I can't think of the name he was using now, but that was one of the guys that he initially helped train. Navajo is a good guy. Nowadays, what's going on, I don't know. They got like 3 or 4 different promotions running, and how good or bad they are is anybody's guess. the last guy that really drew well was a guy named Mike Esparza. He did a Nazi routine as Sergeant Schultz, and he actually drew crowds of 1 to 2,000 at a nightclub in Phoenix, and that was without TV, and that's miraculous. He brought in the Guerreros for a while. He brought in Eddie Guerrero before he was a big star, Mondo and that crew, and he did well with them. But right now, I'm not sure what's going on. They've got several different people running, and a lot of these guys started after I had left, so I really couldn't say how good or bad some of them are. But
and I heard you mention the name Billy Anderson earlier, and I want to know a little bit more about Billy Anderson. I believe it was Chris Colt who broke him in, so to speak, when he was 16, much to his parents' chagrin, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yes and no. Actually, Billy was trained by Kurt von Steiger and the original Buddy Rose. There was a Buddy Rose who was doing Buddy Rose before Playboy Buddy Rose. I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, I didn't.
And then he latched on to Chris Colt and trained him a little and a little bit more. And then they went to Memphis with Billy managing him as Billy Anderson went with him to Memphis under the name of Billy Colt. And they never found out what the full gist of it was, but they had a rather angry falling out and split up. Colt went to wherever, and Billy went back to either Arizona or to Illinois for a while. But I guess they made amends before Colt died. But Billy was always a very, very good worker, and he also was a very good trainer. He and Red Bastien trained a lot of top guys, including Sting and the Ultimate Warrior and Spicoli. Billy and I, we did all kinds of programs with me managing people, trying to do him in. I mean, it just, and he'd win. It'd be back to the drawing board. I'd bring in somebody else, same thing, blah, blah, blah. And,
well, tell me a little bit about the time traveler, because I know that was your gimmick down there in Arizona, was the time traveler. So tell me a little bit more about that gimmick.
Well, I originally started under the name of Mad Dog Martial Beauvais. The Beauvais thing was drawn from a porn star named Leslie Beauvais from the 70s. And in 1985, I did this split personality thing where I'd flip my lid. And I became the time traveler. The idea wasn't taken from Quantum Leap. It was taken from an obscure horror movie called The Keep, where this guy goes, "I'm a traveler." And the idea was I was a nut. I thought I had powers to travel in time, and I'd go back and say, I talked to Frank Gotch, and he showed me a spinning pole hold that I'm going to teach this guy how to do, blah, blah, blah. Or I'd come back in some period costumes with some guy I'm managing. I'd have like a king outfit like Race. I had like a monk's robe, a gunfighter outfit. It was a fun thing, but the problem is it was designed for a weekly show, which indies today, you don't really have too many weekly shows running anywhere. Yeah. It's like, oh, God, what is this fool and the fools he's managing? What are these idiots going to come up with this week, And then, oh, God, now what are these fools going to do next week, and so forth and so on. And we kept it on for a long, long time.
I do want to get in one last name here, because it would be a shame if we finish this show on Arizona without giving a few minutes to probably the most famous wrestler to come out of Arizona, and that's Tito Montez.
Okay, Tito was probably the best-kept secret you could have ever hoped to imagine. He could have gone anywhere, but for whatever reason, he preferred Arizona and the Pacific Northwest. I think he went to Texas now and again, or for Gory Guerrero, and I know he went to Hawaii once for Francis there. He was probably one of the best people to ever come out of Arizona. He was a mainstay there. He was a main eventer in Arizona for 20 years. Regrettably, I was never able to work with him because
what was his era?
Left Arizona in 78, and I started in 79. I knew him when I was taking pictures down at the Garden and that. And I knew him when I was a kid. He was probably one of the finest workers ever. Not a real tall guy, but charisma. He understood selling. He understood when to make a comeback. He worked with and got over working over with guys twice his size, like Bearcat Wright and Woody Farmer, Don Arnold, Colt and Dupree. He even had one match with Sheik. The Sheik was coming through Arizona from probably California to Texas or the other way around or something, and he had one match with the Sheik in Casa Grande. In fact, that would have been about 66. But, Tito was was probably one of the best baby faces in the history of the damn sport, and nobody knows who he is. To see him, he was tremendous. He was just a tremendous worker. He had all the right moves. He knew how to sell. He knew how to make his comeback at the right moment. He understood the concept that wrestling should be, the baby ought to be like Popeye. Brutus there kicks his ass, and then finally, he reaches into his spinach, takes it, makes his comeback, and wins. Now the question is, why didn't he eat his spinach right from the start? Because then you wouldn't have had a cartoon. Same way with him. If he didn't get tromped for 15 minutes, you wouldn't have had a comeback to make. But Tito was just outstanding. I couldn't put him over more.
That was
he also is sadly no longer with us, but he was fantastic. Sadly, so many people don't even know who he is.
Yeah, I'm glad you had a chance to mention his name. I always heard good things about him. I think I saw him the odd time in the Vancouver TV when Portland and them were working together, and we used to get the Vancouver TV out here in Calgary. But I think he was more of an undercard guy there too, though. They didn't seem to really give him a huge push.
I think Tito worked for Dean Silverstone's Outlaw promotion here in Washington for many years.
Yes, he did.
He may have been,
people came up for it. So, yeah, he did.
A lot of the best workers back in those days were the undercard guys. People didn't realize it, but some of the best workers in the business were the guys who were what they called the carpenters, or the guys who would get the so-called main eventers over, and they were the guys who were actually the best.
They'd build the other guy. That's how carpenter. They'd build the other guy. Yeah. And
they were among the best within the industry. Those are the guys that most guys would say were the really great workers. A lot of the guys in the main events were just gimmicks, and were good talkers or had some charisma or something. Like Billy Graham's a good example. He's by no means a great worker, but he was a main eventer. But a lot of those guys like that who were the within the industry were considered the the best workers in the business. But
well, this has been a fantastic show, gentlemen. I have really learned a lot, and I appreciate it. I want to suggest to any fans out there listening to check out both of Dale's books. First, The History of Arizona Wrestling, which has been our topic today, is available online, as is his book on wrestling in Ohio, which is Wrestling in Akron. Check both those out, available at google.com. And thanks so much for joining us today, Dale. I hope you're willing to come on here in the next couple months to tell us all about wrestling in Akron.
I'd love it. I enjoyed it again, as always. It's been a true pleasure.
I just want to, again, thank Dale. Thank you, Bruce, for always having me on. Thank you, Bob Johnson, for the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Matthew, and to Dale, too. I learned a lot myself today, and thanks to everyone.